In a 23-year span from 1980 to 2003, 11 major motion pictures were released in theaters, showcasing the now iconic hockey mask wearing, machete slashing, abstinence advocating serial killer with mommy issues, Jason Voorhees. And I am a big fan of his work. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, email this video to your parents' Hotmail account, because maybe they'll enjoy this look back. As children of the 70s and 80s come together to celebrate the specialness of having a Friday the 13th during the spooky season, here is one Friday fanboy's quickish review of the entire Friday the 13th film series. We begin in 1980 with the OG Friday the 13th. You hear that iconic cha-cha-cha sound within the first 30 seconds. The movie begins in 1958 at a Camp Crystal Lake. Cuts to 22 years later in then present day 1980. Locals call it Camp Blood. A whodunit. We never see the killer till the end. Pretty sweet special effects via Tom Savini. Iconic film score by Harry Manfredini. We see Kevin Bacon belly flop in Speedos. Story makes sense of a closed summer camp that a dude is reopening against the advice of locals.
You're doomed. You're all doomed.
The movie's kinda slow, a bit underwhelming overall, lackluster acting, but nevertheless iconic and legendary. Always worth pointing out that Jason is not the killer in the first one, but rather his mother, and when she gets her comeuppance at the end, Jason is none too pleased. I think Friday the 13th is decent enough. 1981, the first sequel, Friday the 13th Part 2, and I would argue slightly better than the first. Final girl Alice from the first one is in it, but gets killed before the opening credits, which is kinda badass. The storyline kinda sorta works, mostly grounded in reality. First time we hear some of the Jason lore via a campfire story. And he is the killer, though not revealed right away, sorta like the first one. No hockey mask yet, but a pillowcase covering his face. Final girl Jenny survives, but is never heard from again. She is still out there, living her best life, I reckon. This one is one of my faves. I thought Friday the 13th Part 2 was pretty good. Another year, another sequel, Friday the 13th Part 3, released in 1982. The first half of this movie is very meh. Really lame story, bad script, and acting. Turns out in the last one, they didn't kill Jason. There are some good kills in this one. Harpoon through the eye, fire poker through the stomach, machete to the groin, and one of my personal favorites, head squeezing till the eyes pop out. Which I'm sure looked awesome in its 3D theatrical release. Speaking of which, a lot of silly 3D gags. Part 3 stands out as the first time Jason puts on his security blanket, the hockey mask. He's also still healthy enough to run in this one, not the slow stalking style he does in later iterations. Second half is actually pretty solid and saves the movie from being a complete dud. All in all, I thought Friday the 13th Part 3 was good. 1984, and we have a contender for best in the franchise with Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Spoiler, it wasn't.
Surprise, surprise. Surprise, surprise.
Good recap at the beginning, bringing us up to speed on the legend that's been laid out by the previous 3 films. Story picks up where the previous film left off, so there's no gap. A young Corey Feldman stars as Tommy Jarvis, a character who would become the focal point of the next 2 films. He lives near Crystal Lake with his mom and older sister, and they are neighbors to another cabin rented out by 6 fun-loving teenagers. Did they not hear about the slaughter that just took place nearby in Part 3? Some fun, gruesome kills, a great dance performance from Crispin Glover. Jason heals quickly from the machete to the dome he got in Part 3, as he's able to run and chase here as well. An overly gruesome and brutal death for Jason in this one at the hands of Tommy, a child roughly the age Jason was when he was thought to have drowned in the lake. Some fan theories say Jason, honest to goodness, dies in this film. More on that later. I thought Friday the 13th, the final chapter, was very good. 1985, Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. Thought the final chapter was the end? Psych! This one has a lot going for it. Continues the story of Tommy Jarvis from the previous film with an awesome opening scene with Corey Feldman. But because he had to go off and shoot the Goonies, he's not in the rest of the film, as the film jumps to Tommy as an adult. Problem with 5 is, other than this opening scene dream sequence and the occasional Tommy hallucination, it's the only time Jason actually appears in the film, as the mask-wearing killer in 5 is a copycat. We got death by axe, signal flare in the mouth, your classic machete across the throat, call back to the first 2 films where we don't see who the killer is right away. For the most part, really well done. Gruesome ways to die, suspenseful, classic 80s cheesy moments, and Tommy saves the day again. Jason's not really in it, but still, Friday the 13th, A New Beginning was pretty good. 1986, we have Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. Now, this film tends to be my favorite. This is the one I most often reach for when I need a Jason fix, and is possibly the one I've seen the most. Takes place after the events of 5. Tommy Jarvis grabs a friend to dig up Jason to make sure he's really dead. We'll let it go that a cop says in 5 he was cremated. But they dig him up and he's very, very dead. But when he gets struck by lightning, he's reanimated, whoopsie doodles, and becomes what some believe is a zombie. Zombie Jason, looking to get revenge on Tommy, the boy who killed him. No running Jason in this one, remember he's a zombie now. Just forceful, determined strides. Several slappin' Alice Cooper tunes provide the soundtrack. A little humor in this one and poking a little fun at itself, which is nice. The first in the series where we have actual young kids at the camp when Jason shows up, which adds a devious layer of terror to it. He punches through chests, twists, and pulls heads off, and slashes and stabs. We get a classic skull crush, oof, and a sheriff gets folded in half backwards. Another epic showdown between Jason and Tommy, and this time Jason meets his supposed end back in the waters of Camp Crystal Lake. This is everything I'm looking for in a Friday the 13th. I thought Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, was very good. 1988, Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. This is where the franchise begins its decline. No continuing storyline with Tommy Jarvis, which had been the main character in the previous 3 films. Rather, Tina, a young woman with telekinetic abilities, you heard that right, accidentally reanimates Jason, who's been chained up at the bottom of Crystal Lake since the end of Part 6. Oops. Apparently folks just left him there to rot, which he does. He then gets to killing. One of the most iconic killings in the entire series happens in 7, swinging a lady in a sleeping bag like a baseball bat against a tree. It might be the highlight of 7. No real motivation for Jason, just killing the folks he comes across. He still has his post-death superhuman strength, but uses a couple landscaping tools for deaths in this one. First film where Jason is played by Kane Hodder, who is the only actor to play the role multiple times and would do so in the next 3 films. Jason is eventually killed when Tina summons her dead dad, who bursts up through the dock with chains and pulls Jason back down into the lake? Yeah, truly dumb. And sadly, from here on out, the films won't get much better. I thought Part 7 was not that good. 1989, we have Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. A brilliant marketing ploy of posters and trailers show Jason in New York City. That's kind of cool, taking that fish out of water. Unfortunately, this film is more like Jason on a boat. He climbs aboard a boat transporting teens on their senior trip. And he's barely in New York City at all. And in fact, it's shot mostly in Canada. It does pick up from the previous film, but no continuing storyline or specific motivation for killing. Kane Hodder is once again Jason, but he kind of overdoes it with the heavy breathing of Jason in this one. Once in New York, Jason ends up dying in the sewer. There's some toxic waste involved. Very weird, but it would have made for a sweet Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles crossover. A very underwhelming film. Jason Takes Manhattan is not very good. 1993 brings us Jason Goes to Hell: The Final Friday. But would it be? After 4 years with no new film, maybe they were done? Nah, let's bring them into the 90s. In hindsight, maybe they should have been, because Jason Goes to Hell is all kinds of awful. It kicks off with Jason back at Crystal Lake with no explanation of how he went from supposedly dead in the sewers of New York City to back at the lake, and this was before Ubering was a thing. Anyways, with Kane Hodder again as Jason, he's blown to smithereens by some sort of FBI task force or something, but naturally, the heart survives, and some dude eats it. Yeah, and so he is now Jason. So Jason jumps from body to body by some really gross transference of mouthly goo or a neck possum or something, as he hunts down family members who can somehow get him reborn in full health? So he has a living family now? Kinda sounds like that other white masked boogeyman at this point. It's laughingly bad. The classic Jason character is barely in it. A couple of decent kills, but the best part honestly was at the very end, when Freddy Krueger pulls his mask under the ground, hinting at the crossover that wouldn't happen for another 10 years. I've got this one at the bottom of my list. I thought Jason Goes to Hell was really bad. 2001, 8 years after The Final Friday,
Surprise, surprise. Surprise, surprise.
we get what should have been a straight-to-video fan film, Jason X, also known among fans as Jason in Space. The final Jason film with Kane Hodder as Jason, at least for now. Jason gets cryogenically frozen and then falls out on a spaceship 450 years in the future. Wish I was making that up, but no. This story really got greenlit and people paid to make it happen. Some memorable kills, including smashing a woman's frozen head onto a countertop, but the script, story, acting, set design, special effects are all hot garbage. An insult to the franchise. This project should have been shot into space and burned alive as it re-entered Earth's atmosphere, which is how Jason meets his supposed demise at the end. I thought Jason X was very bad. 2003, we have Freddy versus Jason. The matchup children of the 80s had been longing for finally comes to fruition. Chronologically, this one takes place after 93's Jason Goes to Hell, where we saw Jason get swallowed up by the earth and then Krueger's finger blades pull the hockey mask under. This one finds both Fred and JJ neighbors in hell, and Freddy is depressed the parents and kids of Elm Street have largely forgotten him. So he musters enough nightmare magic to resurrect Jason from the grave and point him towards Elm Street in the hopes that the carnage he will no doubt cause will make the residents remember him, allowing his return. It works, but too well, and when Jason starts killing too much on Freddy's turf, the eventual battle fans had long waited for is on. It's mostly a Nightmare on Elm Street based film, so I debated whether to even include it. Robert Englund dons the bladed glove, but much to the chagrin of fans, Kane Hodder gets the axe, and Jason is played by someone else for the first time since 1988. Jason is really painfully slow moving in this one with not a lot of personality, and the filmmakers decide he's suddenly paralyzed with fear of water, which wasn't a problem at all in any of the previous films. The duo battle in Freddy's world, then battle on a boat dock at Crystal Lake, with neither coming out as the definitive victor. An enjoyable final shot of Jason walking out of the waters of Crystal Lake with Freddy's head is the last we've seen of Jason Voorhees within this storyline that began with the original 1980 film. It wasn't perfect, but I think most fans were satisfied, and I still occasionally pull this one off the shelf. I thought Freddy vs. Jason wasn't all that bad. It has now been 20 years since we saw this Jason on the silver screen. A 2009 reboot went nowhere. There are some real duds in the bunch, but some of those earlier films are pretty enjoyable. So, here's my current ranking of all the films after this recent rewatch. If you're looking to watch maybe a few this Halloween season, I recommend going with 3, 4, and 6. 3 has a really good recap of 1 and 2 at the beginning, and you'll see how Jason gets his mask, followed by the Tommy Jarvis storyline. 5 can be skipped because it's not really Jason, but it's certainly enjoyable to watch. And if you want even more after that, go back to 1 and 2 and maybe Freddy vs. Jason. I love Kane Hodder as Jason, and I even met him at a horror convention many moons ago and would completely geek out if he ever plays the role again in a major motion picture. But parts 7 through X are totally skippable. Well, I hope you enjoyed geeking out with me on this epic saga from my childhood. Have a great Friday the 13th and a wonderful Halloween season.